What is sound?
Well, there's the obvious. Sound is something you hear.
Sound actually is silence.
It's the vibrations between space.
The reason sound is silence is because without sound, silence doesn't exist, and without silence, sound doesn't exist.
Sound is close, very close to your origin or to your own being.
I use sound as a vehicle to amplify what's going through me in terms of thoughts and feelings and ripples through my soma.
To get an identity, to get an essence, is all the work of an improvising musician.
I just would play, the way I felt that I should play, and everybody thought it was strange.
There's an element that each musician brought to the music. Now, these elements could have arisen from what they couldn't do or what they could do. Okay, meaning that a drummer may say, well, I don't play time because I can't play time. So therefore, I had to create, I don't feel comfortable playing time, so I had to create a whole nother style to accommodate what I could do. Other people would say, well, I'm tired of playing time and I want to play this way, or I hear this way.
When the great Afro-American musicians came to this country, they came with their musical traditions, like everybody else who came here with their baggage and their ideas, but it's all in the head, And then manifestation time, And it happened, like it happened anywhere in New York. I mean, I pick up a trumpet and, that's interesting. He struggles with it. And he develops his own personal language from other people too, you know what I'm saying? So autodidactic development is sort of like running on a spirit, which is self-organization.
In my own work, I'm striving to eliminate reason. You could just turn that off.
I knew for me, it was an environment that nurtured creativity. You know, it nurtured individual thought. I mean,
20 minutes.
put on pause.
Yeah, put on pause. You have the microphone on, so just.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the interruption. So trying to eliminate, of course, you must understand that one needs to be programmed physically and psychically in order to create music, create this sound to deal with. By programming, I mean educated, must know the traditional systems and how they all operate. But in my own work, I'm trying to eliminate all of those aspects and rely only on intuition, so that the sound, the manifestation of the sound, can be as pure as possible.
Oh, there was other people that would contribute to making their own personal statements in music. If you take it on a broad point of view, like I said, John Cage or David Tudor, you know what I mean? If you look at, oh, that's not the, no, this is American music, you know what I'm saying? American music is based on individuality. Everybody else does the clone. Arnett proved you don't have to be a clone. And Cecil did too. You don't have to play piano like Bud Powell. You can play piano like the way you want to play piano. But Monk said that. Be original. Now, being original, man, that means hard work.
It's difficult to come up with something that's going to make somebody else say, yes, I would have done it the same way. Because most people say, no, I would do it another way.
So that made improvisation the high level for an artist. You understand what I mean?
With 96, 70.
Is not
Trifling and dis.
softer.
About. Up at 2,500.
So I came to the place where everybody comes, New York. Because here you can do and say anything you want to. If people believe it, they'll accept you. If they don't, they'll reject you, because they might reject you anyway, even if they do believe it.
I moved down there about 1958, and what drew me to that was the fact that the music was going on. I needed to be around the live performances of it. And this is where it was happening. And there were people of my, my contemporaries were there. And I needed to bounce off my contemporaries to get an idea of what my chances were.
And the village was such a bubbling joint. I mean, with, dance performances done in, on the street or just in church or something like that. So people doing art events or doing collective gallery events, for instance, artists, painters coming together just to hang their work. Or the famous village art show, which started simply by just hanging people's work on the streets of the village, became a very big type of situation, and dance studios, modern dance, and performance, the happening,
And having being at parties at Leroy Jones's loft, with him reading poetry and having different types of music played was also fantastic. And of course, at that time, it was right in the 60s. There was a lot of experimenting going on with both drugs and sex. So all kinds of strange things was happening.
Chicago is an incredible place for art, really. It doesn't have the restrictions that New York has, because it doesn't have the illusion of competition that New York has.
We were into educating, so the Black Artist Group, the situation was on Washington Street, which was in the heart of the black community. So we had a lot of inner city children that we were teaching all aspects of art. The other thing about the Black Artist Group is that we didn't only deal with just music. We dealt with dance, theater, poetry, visual art, painting.
Muhal Abrams had the experimental band, and you could bring anything into that band. Nobody would ever say, ha, 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 ha. We can't play that. No, they said what it is. Braxton, you bring in a piece of music with X's and circles and squares and a box and a line, and and then a few notes. It's acceptable. And for us, learning to read these different kind of symbolic ways was very meaningful as well, right?
So you got more than music. You got, you got Jean Genet and A.B. Spellman and Baldwin, you know what I'm saying? As well as Catherine Dunham. And, everybody brought their own influence. So you were hearing, so it gave you a broader palette to pull from, You weren't just trying to create off of, let's say, a 12-bar blues forum, you know, you had to create something that had an emotional context.
So the music that was coming out of Chicago, that these youngsters were creating, was very well received. And there were sessions where you could go and play this new music. If you come in there playing some old style, they would look at you funny. Whereas it used to be if you go in there and didn't make the changes, they would look at you funny.
It had to be in the early 50s sometime when a friend took me to hear Louis Armstrong down in the city, down in New York City, Paramount Theater. Went to shake Armstrong's hand, and he took my buddy and myself back into the dressing room. He thought we were like two orphans that shouldn't be out there without a chaperone, you know. He was very, very gracious and caring and funny. But boy, that was it. That day I decided that I would try to play music because he made me feel so good. I just thought maybe I can do that for somebody else.
I was sitting in class, and it was like the second year or the second half of the year, and I remember a student walked in and addressed the class, and she said, was there anyone interested in joining the band? And through my head, I remember the last semester, we would be in class like 2:30, 2 o'clock, and band members would come to class with their uniform on, and they would leave school early. So when she said that, that flashed through my head. Other than that, I hadn't any, inkling of being a musician or even, So my hand went up automatically. And from that point on, I've basically been involved in music, Been trying to figure it out since that point,
I came up to New York to go to college, and I used to do a lot of visual art and visual arts and languages. I was 1 year at Sarah Lawrence College, and I left to play music. And at that time, what happened was like 2 months, after I was there, I heard Sunra in the city. I just fell in love with the music.
We were at Roscoe's house this particular time. We were playing Art Blakey stuff. And we used to start early in the morning, and we would just be there all day. This was every Saturday. And Dracia had these recordings. He had Eric Dolphy, the Prophet. He had Ornette Coleman, The Shape of Jazz to Come. He had Coltrane. I don't think it was Giant Step. It was one of his Inchworm is on. Anyway, he had these 3 recordings. And we listened to these 3 recordings. Prior to the break, we were playing All the Things You Are, I believe, yeah. We were playing All the Things You Are. And then after the break, we played All the Things You Are again, but it was completely different. Everyone had completely, those 3 recordings, that lunch break had completely changed everyone's consciousness. I mean, without a word. No one, we didn't talk about it or nothing. We just started back, but everyone was approaching everything completely different, with much more energy, with much more freedom, with much more feeling better.
Going down the village on the weekends, listening to these fantastic bands, you know, Donald Byrd with Art Taylor and Paul Chambers and Jackie McLean, you know, live at the Bohemia, you know, standing outside, you know, listening because you couldn't go in, you know, and going around the corner to cafes, you know, hole into the village scene, you know, with your sneakers on, you know, beginning of the Jack Kerouac and the Beat Generation, and you know, just absorbing it all, you know, Marxism, socialism, abstract expressionism.
You get involved in the idea of civil rights, of revolution, of poetry, of purpose. And it was clear purpose that really guided me into music. I mean, that was the sort of, because before that I wasn't really I didn't want to be a musician. And it was that I found out that music had purpose, and that immediately said, well, I thought I could be a musician, and that was my purpose, because I didn't really want to, you know, be a Black Panther, you know, although I did hang out extensively with the Black Panthers, but, you know, I would bring in music. I'd bring in the music of Archie Shipp and John Coltrane, but they weren't interested in music. I was interested in music.
My mindset was being there. My mindset was, I'm there. This is what it's like. This is how you think if you're already there. hence free, being free, thinking free, being free of certain structures.
Yeah, this goes back actually to 1960s and the political upheavals that were going on in the United States at the time, and the formation of a group called the AACM, and the Black Power movement, and the neo-aesthetic of consciousness and awareness throughout all of the arts. Beatnik movement, flower power movement, hippie movement. All of these were liberating philosophical approaches. So it was during that period, really, that this became appropriate as music, as viable sound. Because it was something in our experience, but we did not have permission to use those nuances. And it was during that period that everyone was saying, it's okay, we must change the world. So all artists were made incredible changes during that period.
It tried to change a system based on sound in the same way that the politics tried to change the system based on thought.
All through the 60s at different times, it was accessible. The feeling in the air was that people were trying to make a breakthrough of consciousness and doing it together.
That was the birth of free jazz in the 60s. And a lot of certain musicians, you know, Albert Ayler, Graves, Sonny Murray, everybody, you know. That was really the birth of free jazz at that time. When they opened up the music, it was a real revolution.
I remember the story that was told about John Coltrane. Once he was in Copenhagen, and he had just played a concert there with his quartet, I think. And Cecil Taylor was playing in the jazz house Montmartre with his trio with Jimmy Lyons and Sonny Murray. And Albert Ayler was sitting in with them. And after that, Coltrane was there in the audience. After his concert, he came to the club. And Coltrane said the way Albert was playing, that was the way he always had dreamt of playing. And I think that can be heard on many of the later records of Coltrane, that he is going out in the areas where Albert Ayler used to operate. You it's easy to see that Coltrane, he has been listening to many of the concerts that we did at that time. He invited several of the people that was around at that time to take part in his ascension, in his recording session.
But he called a lot of people and invited them, people who had already crossed the border and could help the others get across. Farrah Sanders, Dewey Johnson, Archie Shipp, John Tchicai. So he brought us together and wanted us together to make this statement. One group of musicians all played music based on known forms. The others played on forms that were unknown and unheard of.
Of course, for the general jazz audience, then that was way too early for them to start to be able to, and it's probably still, it's even more so maybe today, it's still difficult for audiences to cope with that kind of form, because it takes a lot of knowledge of music, and most people don't have that, and most people are used to only having one melody going at a time, and cannot cope with polyrhythms and polytonality and sounds that are unusual in the popular sound picture.
Alan Silva advertised a place in New York, actually Brooklyn. He wanted some artists to come live communally. I like that idea. I've always been a communal type person. And sure enough, we hit it off, and he was already starting to play some pretty strong improvised music with 3 bass players and 2 drummers.
I said, well, come on over and play with us, you know. And Burton said, what tunes we want to play? I said, we're not playing any tunes. We're just playing, jumping the wire. And he sort of fell in very well with the concept. And that became a relationship between me and Burton. We went on to develop a group called the Freeform Improvisation Ensemble.
We kind of laughed and smiled at each other and said, we don't need a script, do we, to make music? Not at all. No fly shit on the paper, man. We just sat down, looked at each other, and there we were gone, man. Just listened and gone. And that was the glue in that music, and still is the glue in the music. If you don't know how to listen, you don't know how to play. We had this first band without any notation, no charts, just intuitive playing. When it was not great, it was a kind of a grope group. We hadn't found, you always have to get the outside externals in your life outside you, so you can concentrate on the inner experience. So there was those periods where you have to break through maybe an argument with your girlfriend or with your wife, or the bill collectors were on you or something. You had to get all that external shit away so you could get down with the music making. And when we got to it, man, it was wonderful.
Composers are interested in some kind of orderly fashion to express their tonal world, right? Free jazz, on a collective improvisation concept, is based primarily on what I used to say in our group was musicians talking to each other within a compositional concept, not necessarily a theme and variation concept.
If you look at other world systems of improvisation, you can see the same kind of dimensions. In other words, you have something from the past which you might call an improvisational theory, which means ideas about performing music that give you fantastic leeway, fantastic freedom. At the same time, you have to be very studied, very disciplined, and very knowledgeable with the elements of the theory in order to get this kind of freedom.
Found out that you can also make your own music. You don't always have to copy other people's music. I think after having worked with Contemporary 5 with Don Cherry and Archie Shipp, I had some kind of intuition about wanting to do something that was different. So I was talking to Roth about trying out something. So what we then did, we were talking about who we wanted to have in as the other members in the group. Then finally we stumbled on Milford Graves and Louis Farrell. And so with those two, it really started to work.
We had, first of all, a knowledge of the system. That would be the tempered system, chord progressions, chord theory, tonality, atonality, etc., all based around this system. And then, of course, when you go into the other part of it, going beyond the system into world rhythms, microtonality, improvisation, the stuff that you know, live composition, the stuff that, regardless of system, it's the stuff that performances are made out of. We were connected to the bloodstream of American classical music, and perhaps even more connected than other people who were just genuflecting and paying lip service to it.
There were no rhythmical restrictions.
Rhythm has opened up. Well, music opened up, so it allows you many different facets to explore.
You could set up a rhythm and the other guys would complement it, or they would make, they would come up with a counter rhythm. And then you could again break that same rhythm after having played it maybe for a minute or 2 minutes.
And the roles of each musician have expanded. You know, for example, rhythm section players, they don't have to just play in a certain place. Or maybe the more front musicians don't have to play in a certain place. You can switch these roles. You have so many different possibilities.
It made it absolutely possible for some things to happen that wouldn't happen otherwise.
And plus, man, I believe there's something in the society to weed out soulfulness, man.
Yeah, it's called...
You know, and it could be like black, white, Asian, Italian, Polish, whatever, man. You ain't supposed to have it. Unless they co-opt it into Hollywood and make it be a clown, you know?
I don't want to hear this out. Okay. It's more and more, it's getting to be breath by breath. Right.
Direction with no problem. Went to the right on the circle.
You got headphones here?
Yeah.
So we ready to roll?
Yeah, about 2 minutes.
Okay. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give a very warm greeting to other Dominican musicians.
As a young musician, as an Afro-American musician, as an American musician, as a jazz musician that doesn't like what I see in the neoclassical commercial structure that's been erected around the Young Lions in the 90s, as many things, that the free jazz body of work that existed did give me a context for my ideas as a composer. The major context it gave me was that I actually liked the music.
My idea was not only to move music through a person's body, but through their head. Got to make them think.
I wasn't interested in being, at that point, a, quote, jazz musician, although I had to learn all of the elements that it took to be a jazz musician. I was interested in being an improviser. And in doing that, you had to learn about a lot of different things, you know? And you had to put yourself, or I tried to put myself in environments that I could realize how I responded to that particular situation. So, of course, you would try the blues, which is a 12-bar form, but at the same time, you would try no form at all.
Cause it didn't use formulas for playing things. The only formula you use is your natural feeling.
I remember, you know, thinking about my clarinet teacher and the idea of like what was considered to be a pure, coherent sound. I said, wow, man, you know, Coltrane doesn't have a pure, coherent sound. And it, you know, it disturbed me, but there was something about it that I can't even remember the steps in between that first response. And I said, well, Coltrane is top.
So you have to come with something different. So it puts you in a mindset of thinking free. And that's all free jazz was to me. You know, I never used the term myself, but it was basically being free to explore all the different aspects, including 32 bar structures, you know, and 3-6-2-5-1, you know, turnarounds and all of that. But at the same time, improvising with just a trumpet and a dancer.
How many forms in the nature? How many forms in the jungle? We're not limited to AABA, which would kill the traditional jazz thing because it was all limited to very simple structures. As many forms as there are in trees and in parks and nature and jungles. And a person who has experienced all that, has that in his collective unconscious, can come out with all that whenever he needs to. The point here is we emphasize the creative experience and not the form.
The people who didn't like it because it didn't conform to the forms that were established. And the people who did like it for that reason.
I do find that open music lends itself to more explorations for me, you know? You're not depending on a particular scale or chromatic system, you know. You have to dig deep and you have to pull from your own personal experiences.
collective improvisation is fundamentally a bunch of musicians talking to each other, you know, having some fun, enjoying making music together. It ain't a bunch of symphonic cats sitting down reading somebody else's music and waiting to get to the gig. You know, it's a bunch of guys sitting around creating some music, because that's what they do.
Before the concert, sometimes I'm thinking, okay, that I want to do something I never did before. Okay, when we start the concert and the sound begins, it's like stepping into a car wash. For some reason, all the pre-thought, it gets washed away immediately. And then you're left out like on the ocean without a boat. I mean, that's the feeling, like this big wave, and what are you going to do? And then sometimes you wait for someone to do something, and they don't do anything. So then you do something, but you don't think about it, it just happens.
You had to deal on a level of extreme freedom, not just on a level of impromptu or relaxed, or yeah, he's kicking back a little bit. No, I mean, you really are taking this improvisation thing to the stars, and you need all the equipment that you can get in terms of theory, in terms of your soul, your mentation, your experience, and your ability to communicate with others. You are really going whole hog with this improvisation thing.
But you got to get past your own little bag of tricks and your own cliches. Now, they're there, and they're there to support you, and that's great, but you got to let them go, and that's when spontaneous improvised music starts to happen. You got to not, you know, as they say in theater, you can't be afraid to fall on your face. Maybe you do fall on your face a little bit. That's when it starts to happen. Mistakes are pregnant with ideas.
And then somebody else does something, and then somebody else does something, and next thing you know, you've built a boat. In fact, you've built a submarine.
Wow,
you know, and then you're sailing these waters, you know, and as you go on, you know, someone builds a sail, and then someone makes a telescope, and then until finally you sight land, and then
that boat, it is the ocean.
This music, for me at the moment, It's liberation. It's trying to liberate me from my own suffering and to purify my consciousness for some higher development. Now, if a music really puts that on the line, as what John Coltrane did with Love Supreme and cosmic stuff, then we have a great tradition. If it meant that I was going to be a multi-millionaire with a lot of followers and stuff, you know, and I could sit here and lecture to the whole world, you know, I'm not that guy. I just want to play the bass, you know. I'm not running for any office, you know. I'm not running for any political job. I just like playing music, you know what I mean?